More than willing to listen. Beautiful girls, a little high maintenance. Yeah. But this is a special night for us. Jeff has a lot of ties to this community as well through a book he wrote called The Mormon Way of Doing Business. There's a number of CEOs that live in New Canaan that Jeff interviewed for that book, including Rod Haas, who's, as we all know, Haas Plaza at Dunning Field, which I was involved with thanks to Jim Dunning, which I did not know what I was getting into at the time of that construction of that stadium, but it turned out to be a beautiful thing for the community. So we're really excited to be here. A bit of good news. We found out, about an hour ago that we debuted at number 5 at the New York Times bestseller list. A week ago, we found out tonight we're number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list, nonfiction. You know, if hard work and, as my wife can, slight madness can mean anything as far as success is concerned, we're very happy about that. The other bit of really good news for us is that Alex Gibney, who's a Academy Award-winning documentarian film director, has agreed to partner with us to do a docuseries based on the book. Down the line, we're in the midst of talking to a bunch of really very important networks at the moment. So the book has been critically acclaimed. It's selling, all the things you hope when you devote 3 years of your life to something. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background as to how it came about. We had done a book together called The System, which was a deep dive into big-time college football. That book, just to brag for another second here, was eventually optioned. And now Starz is turning it into a dramatic series based on our book, and it's only taken 4 years, so welcome to Hollywood. But it's so we decided that we were looking for another big project to do, another mountain to climb, and our agent, Richard Pine, came up with this brilliant idea of Tiger Woods. To give you an idea, the proposal that we wrote for The System was 30 pages long. The proposal that we wrote for Tiger Woods was what?
It was a couple paragraphs.
Yeah, it was basically 2 paragraphs. It's like Armen and Jeff want to do a big biography about Tiger Woods, and Simon & Schuster, to their ever-loving, credit and our benefit, backed it. John Karp, who's the president of Simon & Schuster, great guy, beyond smart. They bought into it, and then Jeff and I basically spent the next 3 years of our life. And just briefly, to answer probably a question that some of you have is like, so what did you do? Well, the first thing we did, we read every book of significance that was ever written about Tiger Woods, and that was some 20-odd books, from Earl Woods to Stevie Williams to Hank Haney to John Feinstein, Tom Callahan, even sort of an obscure British journalist named Howard Soons, who wrote a book called The Wicked Game, which is one of the best books about golf I've ever read. And then we decided to access the Sports Illustrated library because of our history with the magazine, and they gave us thousands and thousands of pages of every book or every article that had ever been written about Tiger Woods, and Jeff, with some of his research assistants, put them all in chronological order. And then we decided we were going to mine every major press conference that Tiger had, which was 320, and we had those annotated and then color-coded by subject matter, and then so that which would allow us to go back and look at certain things. And then we made this massive timeline of his life, going back to Earl Woods being born and raised in Manhattan, Kansas, because we realized early on that you had to understand Earl in order to understand Tiger. That timeline alone ran 120 pages. It was like 70,000 words. But what it gave us was a really interesting, accurate picture of what was happening in Tiger's life when he would win, like the Masters in '97. What else was happening? When he won his last major in 2008, what else was happening in his life? And then we went out and interviewed 250 people from every walk of his life, many of them, as we'll talk about as we discuss it in greater detail, who had never talked before. But we didn't know those people existed until we had done all the, mind-boggling reporting before we really started to write significantly. And I guess we can tell them the one story was we thought we had it. We thought we were in a really good position. We wrote, what, 70?
You're going to tell that?
Yeah. We wrote 70,000 words. The beginning of the book, we thought, and our editor, Jofi Ferrari Adler, and we're very excited, as you can only imagine, because we're finally writing the book. And he says, yeah, I don't think you have it yet. I don't think, we're like, what? You don't understand. We've done 25 books together. We know what we're doing. He goes, no, I don't think you really have it. And so we had to go back and write it. What you'll find in this book is it's written very much through Tiger's eyes and through his perspective, which is really hard to do unless you do the kind of reporting that we did. And the last thing I will say is, you don't do this with somebody unless you're working with somebody like Jeff. We have known each other for 20 plus years. I think I was at ABC News and you were at the Center for the Study of Sport. Jeff was deeply involved in the research on sexual assault with athletes, and I was doing a piece for World News Tonight, and I called him up, and he was like, oh yeah, I have all that information. And I'm like, this guy's good. And
I was in college.
he was in college at the time. And so when Jeff got to Sports Illustrated and I was the chief investigative correspondent for CBS News, we collaborated on two major investigations that were the first time that a network and Sports Illustrated had ever collaborated. One was on crime in college football. The second was on drugs and gangs in sports. And from that came the system. And I would never do a book like this, and I think Jeff feels the same way. You're on a very high wire here with Tiger Woods. One mistake of significance, it can destroy 3 years of reporting in your life. And Jeff's integrity, his credibility, his carefulness, and we laugh. I'm the fire, he's the ice. It's like I'm the first one to say, I was do this to that person, and he's like, no, let's just calm down and think it through. And it's it's a unique partnership, but it's the best thing. I would never want to do any book like this without anybody but Jeff. So I'll shut up and I'll let Jeff talk now. So I'm sorry, Jeff.
It's. Thank you very much. I think mine's on, right? Yeah. So I'm just going to step out here. It's great to be back in New Canaan. I love coming to this town for book events. I was just talking to Kathleen in the back. I think since the Mormon Way of Doing Business, which was back in 2007, I think I've done six or seven of these here, and it's a great town for books. You're lucky to have an independent bookstore. You're one of the few towns left in Connecticut that has one. It's great to be here with Armen because Armen lived here for so long. And we have been partners for what feels like a really long time. This project took so much out of us physically and emotionally. It felt like we were just wiped out at the end. It was exhausting. But I think it's probably fair to say that it's the hardest thing that either one of us has ever worked on. And it's the best thing we've ever worked on. I think the most rewarding thing about this is that it was so hard, and that it was. I'll admit that there were many times in the process where, alone in my office in Lyme, with the door closed, I really didn't know what to do or how to do this. This was the idea of trying to write a book from Tiger Woods' perspective when we've never talked to Tiger Woods drove us both nuts. I mean, we would scream at each other on the phone about how ridiculous it was to try to do that, and we resisted it for so long because the journalists in us said you can't do that. Like you shouldn't do that. But we ultimately came around to the idea that our editor was trying to get us to see, which was that the book would be much more compelling if it was not from Armen and Jeff's point of view, but it was Tiger Woods' point of view. And I honestly didn't know how to do that. I had just spent 4 years with Steve Young, and I wrote from his point of view, but I did 50 interviews with him, so it wasn't that hard. This was not that. And but now that it's done and we have it out, it's just, I look at this as we've had a privilege as writers to be able to chronicle the life of one of the most interesting, compelling, and misunderstood public figures in America in the last 25 years, and perhaps, one of the most compelling athletes that we've seen in our generation. And Armen and I have written about a lot of athletes from all kinds of sports, but I've never written about anybody as interesting as Tiger. And unlike Armen, who is a longtime golfer and belongs to a country club here, I've never played golf, and so you wouldn't want to see me on a golf course. But my perspective coming into Tiger Woods was that I was kind of agnostic toward him. I didn't like him, but I didn't dislike him. But my opinion changed dramatically working on this book. By the time we got to the end, I had a tremendous amount of empathy for him. You can look at some of his behaviors in his career, and on one hand, you could say, well, why wouldn't you tip the guy who carries your bags when you're the richest athlete in the world? Why wouldn't you say thank you to a school teacher in Augusta who lets you stay in her house every year for a week? Couldn't you just leave a note or some flowers or something to acknowledge her? There are so many things like that you could look at that and go, geez. But on the other hand, we started looking at the fact that we have children. Armen's got 2 daughters, I've got 2 sons and 2 daughters, and there were so many things as parents that were so odd to us about the way Tiger was raised. The idea of trotting your son out on national television when he's 2 years old and essentially forcing him to perform in front of millions of people when the son is shy and he stutters and he's awkward and he clearly doesn't want to be there. But he was introduced to that kind of life early, and so many times you could see why by the time he was a pro, the last thing he wanted to do was be nice to a journalist. He'd had microphones, cameras, and pens in his face since he was a toddler. Before he could write his name, he was being asked to answer questions. And I think by the time he got to the PGA Tour, he just didn't want to do that. And so he came across as rude. He was rude, and he came across that way. But we were trying to get to the root of explaining that. And I just feel like we've had a great privilege in our career to have worked on Tiger Woods, and to have the odyssey we've been on for 3 years has been wonderful. And now that the book's out, it continues, and who knows where the guy's going to go. But to leave off the way we did with him coming back this year, a year ago, Armen and I were on the phone on Memorial Day weekend getting the reports that were coming out of Florida about the DUI arrest and how he was found on the side of a road, slumped over the wheel with the engine running and the lights on and 2 tires blown out. And we were just thinking, how in the world are we going to end this book? I mean, it's such a downer. Nobody's going to want to end reading a book on this note. It's going to be so depressing. And we were stuck, like, what are we going to do? And then all of a sudden, as we were writing towards the deadline, we started seeing pictures on Twitter of him swinging. And then we started seeing rumors of him perhaps playing in December. And little by little, we got our ending. And fortunately, we had an editor and a publisher that were smarter than us in the sense that they actually instructed us not to write the ending. So when we turned our manuscript in on the deadline, we purposely did not have an ending because they wanted to see what would happen. And they said, we kept getting nervous, like, we got to write the ending, we got to write the ending. And they kept saying, wait till January, wait till January. And then in January, Armen went out to Torrey Pines, Tiger played, and then we had 10 days to write the ending. And that was some fast writing, and we got it done. And I think if you look at the opening sentence and the last sentence, the opening sentence is, the most powerful athlete in the world cowering behind a locked bathroom door. That's pretty good stuff. And then the last sentence is this guy who's come back and he wants to show his kids and everyone else in the world what a living legend looks like. That's the spectrum of Tiger Woods. And so, want to take some questions?
Yeah, let me just do one thing, just to give you a sense. And I got to say hello to somebody. Sean McManus is here, my boss at. I wouldn't be where I am today without Sean. He was my boss at CBS Sports. He had the bright idea of bringing me to CBS News as the chief investigative correspondent, and I'm sure that raised a few eyebrows in a few quarters in the journalism community. But it was great to see Sean here. Just a couple things. This book, when you're writing it, and Jeff and I would talk literally, sometimes 20 times a day. I would call him up and he'd be like, really, you're calling me again? But the book has this Shakespearean art to it, and it's not a sports book. It's really a book about 2 things, really. Who is Tiger Woods, which was something that had been protected by his team, his inner circle, for the better part of 20 years. And the second, I think, important question is what's the price of genius? When we compare him to Shakespeare in terms of somebody you see once and you may never see again, transcendent athlete. But there's so many arcs to his life. You can just go, child star, prodigy, turns the tour upside down, goes in the Masters, Tiger Mania, incredible run, the rise, the epic fall, the incredible scandal that he went through at the time where he was on the cover of the New York Post for 21 straight days, a record 21 straight days, more than 9/11. Think about that. The aftermath of 9/11 was on the cover 20 days. Tiger Woods was on the cover of the New York Post for 21 straight days. Every social media outlet, TMZ, National Enquirer, he was the fodder for tabloids. Then there's this, that's the reckoning. And then you have this return, which is in fits and starts. He gets the guys in the room, he gets the chip yips, he can't play anymore. He breaks down. And everybody's like, he can't play anymore. And then he goes through this incredible physical debilitation. He has 3 microdiscectomies, none of them which work. And he finally, he can't get out of bed. Literally cannot get out of bed for months at a time. He's got children that are growing up in front of his eyes, and he can't even kick a soccer ball with them. It's the polar opposite of what his father was to him. And then you have this surgery that begins this literally miracle comeback. And then you find him on the side of the road in Florida in Memorial Day weekend last year, and you're thinking it's the end. It's a Michael Jackson story. And, talk about endings of the book. I wrote like 4 different endings to this book, one darker than the other. And Jeff was like, I'd be like, Jeff, I think this is the ending. And he'd be, the ice and this whole thing, he'd be like, nah, I don't think that's it yet. I don't think we want to end it that way with the darkness. And then he comes back.
Dark.
It was dark. I mean, we're thinking, we spent 2 years at that point in our life, and we're like, this is how it's going to end for us?
There were actually times when we would get to the end of the day, and writing about these things is not fun. I mean, it's exhilarating to write about somebody who's capable of shooting in the dark and doing the amazing things that he could do on a golf course. As someone who doesn't even play golf, I found that exhilarating to write those passages. I found it depressing and sad to write some of the passages we had to write about his childhood, about his adolescent years, and about the things going on in his personal life. There's no joy in writing about somebody's personal struggles, and as biographers, you don't have the luxury of skipping that stuff. It's not that kind of book. And so the trick for us was we're also not judges, and we're not priests. We're not there to pass judgment on Tiger Woods, and so we were just trying to explain this guy and to do it in as compassionate a way as we can, because it's not like you don't already know that he had an infidelity crisis. It's not like you don't know that he had a very public divorce and that he lost his family. It's not like you don't know he hasn't been arrested and found with 5 drugs in his system for sleeplessness and pain. You already know all that stuff. So we're not shedding any new light by telling you that. What we tried to do is try to explain why did that happen, and hopefully appeal to your sense of humanity that I get it now. It's not a pile-on. It's not the tabloids hunting him like they did. They literally stalked this guy for years. And we would ask ourselves, what would it be like for Jeff and Armen to know that every time you walked out of your house or your wife went to the grocery store, that there was someone trailing her or us with cameras, hoping to catch us doing something embarrassing and then writing about it. That's what this guy lived with. So our idea was, you can say what you want about the personal decisions Tiger's made in his life, but we didn't go in there to judge this guy. We went in there to try to put context around what he's done and what's happened to him, so that hopefully when people get to the end of the story, if nothing else, you go, I think I get this guy now.
Yeah. And you have to, just last thing, just before we get questions, you have to understand, you talk about Shakespearean drama, it's a story really about fathers and sons. We wrote this book for not only the hardcore golfer to help them understand, what genius is really like on a golf course, but for women, because there's many, many, many scenes in this book with Tiger, with his first true love, and how they're broken up in a very cold-hearted way by Earl and Tita, Tiger's mother and father. Alicia O'Meara, who Jeff spent hours talking to, who's literally Tiger's second mother. And when he moves to Isleworth, and Mark O'Meara, and many of the guys know, World Hall of Fame golfer. Mark is his big brother. Alicia becomes the mother in many ways he never had. So compassionate and so caring. And then you have a string of other, women in Tiger's life that have come in and out for various reasons. You understand sex addiction. You understand gifted children. You understand the Navy SEALs. You understand who Earl Woods is and who Keltita Woods is, because if you don't understand them, you don't understand Tiger Woods. It was an orchestral kind of, there's a lot of movement and there's a lot of instruments in this book, and to get them all to kind of work together, it took every bit. I mean, we're pretty proud of our journalistic skills. This took every bit of everything we have.
And some things we didn't have.
And some things we didn't have. And, Dee Dee's here, my wife is here, and I could not have done it without her, because to the point where I would not sleep and I would think about what the next day was going to bring, and she would be like, she was so supportive of what I went through, because you have to live these things in a way that's not really healthy. And when you come out of it, you cross your fingers and you hope that you get the kind of reviews that we've gotten, and you get the kind of sales and success we've had that way, but you don't know. I mean, we got a phenomenal review by Dwight Garner in the New York Times called
Best book review we've ever done.
Yeah, a perfectly pitched biography. I mean, I didn't know that Dwight Garner, literally, one of our agents, his partner said, come into my office and I'll show you all the books that Dwight Garner has killed on my shelf. I mean, that never left this office. So he was the first one to come out with an absolutely rave review of this book, and we thought, oh my God, we have a chance. But you don't know. I mean, you really don't know. It's like you devote so much of your life to something, and you think, is this really going to be worth it? And it's, it would have been, I don't even want to think of what it would have been. So anyways, it's 7 o'clock. We're open to questions. I'll just start here and feel free.
So something I've always wondered is I've, watched Tiger closely and seen his physical infirmities. What is your view of the drug program that the PGA runs relative to other sports? And is it possible that some of his physical problems could be attributed to taking, PDAs?
You want?
I'll take the next one.
Okay, I'll take this. There's a chapter in a book called Miracle Workers, which deals with the whole suspicion of PEDs, and Tiger's body, we all saw it changed dramatically. He turned from a real skinny kid to an NFL safety over a very short period of time, and you didn't have to look far on the PGA Tour to find people that had suspicions that he was using performance-enhancing drugs. That, without question, is the third rail for Team Tiger. I've been involved with investigative journalism a long time. Sean's here. I covered Tiger's return back in 2010 for the network, and that's just something, if you get wrong, you're guaranteed lawsuit and you're going to lose. So I spent an enormous amount of time. The question is, his physical injuries, the ligaments, the tendons, all the infirmities that were associated with Tiger were unique to golf. The PGA Tour did not put in a drug testing program until right after Tiger won the 2008 U.S. Open at Torrey Pines. It went in on July 1st. He wins it in June. There's a really interesting passage in our book from Hank Haney, who said that just prior to the drug testing, right after Tiger participated in the Masters and before he went to Torrey Pines, he went and got a blood test. And Tiger's answer was, well, I'm taking all these supplements, and you know that you can test positive for marijuana if you're taking Motrin. And this is from Hank Haney's mouth, his swing coach. And we're thinking, yeah, that makes no sense whatsoever. So that adds to the suspicions. But what we did in our book, there's a tremendous amount of reporting that goes into Tiger's relationship with two Canadian doctors. Mark Lindsay, who is his chiropractor, who I've known for 20 years through my work in, sports journalism, and Tony Gallia, who was the mystery man, the other miracle worker with PRP, platelet-rich therapy, cutting edge, brilliant guy. What we allege in the book is that when Tiger was getting treated by Dr. Gallia in Florida for his knee, after his major knee surgery, that Tony had this so-called cocktail of healing, which I had heard about. It's a lot of IGF factors. There's a lot of things that go into it, and we say this in the book, that minuscule amounts of HGH and testosterone were part of that cocktail of healing that were injected specifically into Tiger's ligament to help accelerate the healing. Did Tiger know that? The odds are he did not. And we make that very, very clear in the book. The other question, was he using performance-enhancing drugs as a way to recover from his monumental workouts? We actually, through a very interesting set of circumstances, were able to get Tiger, who is so uncooperative with us on everything else, to sign a doctor-patient waiver that allowed Dr. Mark Lindsay to write a legal declaration, 4 pages, that we closed this chapter with. And Mark has had his hands on world-class athletes, Olympic athletes, for the better part of 20 years. And he said in his...
And he's had his hands on Tiger.
And he's had his hands on Tiger for hundreds of hours. In 2008 and 2009, he made 49 trips to Florida to work on Tiger. And he would literally set up at Isleworth. Tiger would train, work out. Mark would have his table there. And Mark's worked on me. I know what it's like to have Mark Lindsay work on. And it's a very interesting experience because he's got God-given genius in his hands. But he said, I've had my hands on every athlete of significance from Sharapova to Rodriguez. He goes, I know what a body feels like when you're injecting testosterone because there's certain tactile things that you feel. He said, I never felt any of that in Tiger. And Tiger Woods worked out harder and longer and more demonically than almost any athlete I've ever seen. And that's part of his genius and part of his greatness. So it was interesting to get that because it's obviously a question that has come up time and time again. And we felt like we got as far as we could go without ending up saying something that we would regret for the rest of our lives. Yes, sir.
Thanks. The one thing that struck me at the Masters was when Tiger comes up 18, 15, 16 shots back and receives a standing ovation from the patrons, probably louder than Reed got when he came up. And I was saying, look at the way that the patrons have forgiven and embraced him again, and this redemption had come like full circle. And I thought that was the most, amazing scene that I had seen to say, wow, this has really come full circle. And I wonder what you thought about that.
Well, I personally love that word, redemption. It's a word that we used a lot in our private conversations when we were trying to craft the narrative, particularly at the end. I think it's a theme that resonates with people. Forget the United States. I think around the globe, redemption is a theme that people are magnetic to. And in his case, we've seen a guy whose all of his warts have been on full display. There's no one in this room who would want to be exposed the way Tiger Woods has been exposed. I did a talk in the Dominican Republic back in February before our book was on sale to 120 golfers and their wives in a room. And I opened by asking a question. I described the opening scene of the book where Tiger's locked in the bathroom and his wife's banging on the door and he's got to figure out what to do because she's just caught him on a cell phone. She now knows he has been cheating on her and lying about it. And then I turned to all the guys in the audience and I said, what would you do? And this guy, this very wealthy guy in the front row whose wife was sitting next to him shouted out, "Keep lying." But there's so much truth in that. There's so much truth in that. And I think what is interesting about him is the reason it's easy to rally around him now is because he's been through it all. He's been through infidelity and divorce and pain addiction pills and arrest. He's been humiliated, mocked, made fun of. His arrest, his sobriety tests on the side of the road, you can watch them on YouTube. When he was in custody in the police station, I mean, who in the right mind would want to have the tape of you half out of it in police barracks saying things that make no sense and then having everybody watching it on their computer screens at home? And I think at some point you go, enough already. And now that he's back and golf's a sport where you can't hide under a helmet, you can't hide amongst a team of 10, it's just you. And you got no protection. You're wide open. And this guy walks out in the gauntlet and he's like, I'm here. And I'm going to play. And I think a lot of people see a guy who's dusted himself off. He's in midlife. He's 42. He's admitting, I'm not what I used to be, but I want to keep going here. And to me, you don't have to like golf to get goosebumps over that. And I think that's what you were seeing with all those people cheering for him. You're cheering for something greater than that.
If I could just add something to that is, we feel like we're tigerologists at this point in time. It's like archaeologists, tigerologists. We have sifted through pieces. You think about putting a puzzle together, and for the longest time, all these puzzle pieces looked the same. They were all white, and they all had the same ridges to them. And you're like, okay, how does this fit to that? But no question in our minds, and we talked a lot about this after this DUI arrest think about it, it was a Memorial Day weekend last year. We're not even talking a year. This guy was a mess. He had a cocktail of drugs in his system. He could have killed himself. It could have been the end of the Michael Jackson story. He comes back out of that.
He could have killed other people.
Could have killed other people. The spinal fusion surgery works, which is somewhat of a miracle in itself. But more importantly, he comes out, and it's not just us saying, it's tour players and people that we've talked to for the last 3 years. He's a different person. He's more appreciative. He's more grateful. There's a sense of gratitude. He's more human, and that's a word that comes up time and time again. He just wasn't. Mark O'Meara has one of the great quotes in our book, sooner or later you have to be a human being. And Tiger, for the first 41 years of his life, really wasn't a human being. He was the world's greatest golfer, but he wasn't a terribly nice person, or he was a nice person on his terms all the time. It was a one-way street, Tiger Woods' way. And this is what you see now is what you saw at the Masters. He and Phil playing together. I mean, if you know what we know about Phil and you know what you know about Phil and Tiger, that's like the Hatfield and McCoys playing golf together at the Masters for 9 holes. Because Phil was a rival, and Tiger would do everything in his power to hate that person just because he was a rival. But they're different now, and I think that's what makes Tiger so captivating and so rich for us, is that he's kind of figured out at 42 years old, I don't have to be this way anymore. I'm just going to enjoy I'm going to enjoy walking up 18. I shot 69. I could have shot 65. But you know what? I'm happy to be here. And it makes him so much more real and relatable than he's ever been.
Well, then the story isn't over, is it? It was.
Oh my God, not with him.
It was so wonderful. I see another book.
Oh, please don't say that.
It was so wonderful to watch him at the Masters, speaking and acting like a human being, smiling, seeming to have fun, appreciating. It's a totally different Tiger than we have ever seen before. And I guess you guys ended the book before this all, well, obviously
Well,
you
we
did.
ended it.
We actually ended it up on a very upbeat note because I saw it at Torrey. in late January, and I'd seen Tiger in a lot of different situations. And I came back to Jeff and I said, I saw him a year earlier. He looked like dead man walking. He was not good in good health. And when he was at, if some of you in the room might remember when the Genesis Open, he withdrew from the Genesis Open. And there was a scene at the Hillcrest Country Club where Tiger was there just before he withdrew. And I happened to be able to interview somebody that sat next to him at Hillcrest. And he was a mess, physical mess and an emotional mess, and was way over medicated at that point in time. But now you see him and you're like, oh my God, he's enjoying this. And it's so joyous to see because there's nobody like him. Well, I don't know, but we said in the book, and I believe this in sort of the ending and before the ending, but I don't really care whether he wins another golf tournament. I'm sure, Sean would like to see him, on the back nine on Sunday, as all the networks, and he's already proven that. But what he's accomplished right now is the greatest triumph of his life. It transcends everything that he's accomplished on the golf course in our mind, because most people don't come out of the hole that he was in. Yes, sir.
You guys have read all of these other Tiger books, and I read the Stevie Williams book. I'm not aware that Tiger has ever commented on it. I would guess that he hasn't, but what would you think, being Tigerologist, that he thinks about Stevie Williams in the Stevie Williams book?
Well, you would think he was disloyal. Tiger's two big things are trust and loyalty, privacy and loyalty, I think. And, Stevie, safe to say, I read, there were actually two books that Stevie wrote, the last one, Out of the Rough, and there's another one, it's fascinating, about golf at the top. It's really kind of this deep psychological dive into the game. But what you see, and Jeff can give you examples time and time again, people that speak out or are perceived as disloyal to Team Tiger, they are cut out. They're amputated from that inner circle.
To that point, given that it was an unauthorized biography, were you able to get any of his inner circle to speak on record?
Yeah, his inner circle has changed over the years. There's been a little bit of a revolving door there. If you go back to the inner circle, he's actually had an inner circle since he was young, before he was even on the tour. There's always been a really tight group of people around him. Originally, it was just his parents. And then when he became an amateur, it expanded a little bit. And then when he first turned pro, a few more people came into it. But over time, a lot of those people have rotated out. And so we made a point to try to get to all the people who at one time or another occupied the circle, except for those who are in it right now, like Mark Steinberg. We knew we weren't going to be able to talk to him, but a good example of someone who was in the inner circle, and it's actually related to your question about how much he seems likable now, and the smile on his face, and how he looks like someone you'd want to know. One of the guys in that inner circle that we got to lives right here in Connecticut, a guy named John Merchant, who's a lawyer from Fairfield County in Bridgeport. He's one of those guys that nobody knows much about him, but he had such a critical role in Tiger's life at such a critical time. It was in that transition from amateur to pro. He was an accomplished lawyer. He worked in government here in Connecticut, appointed by Governor Weicker. Sophisticated guy, first African-American to graduate from the University of Virginia Law School, a very accomplished guy living here who takes Tiger under his wing and is basically guiding him through the end of his amateur career, raising money for him in Fairfield County to help him finance his amateur career. And he was one of the guys who basically who looked at Tiger and thought, this is a kid. If his dad would get out of the way and allow this kid to speak and be himself amongst people, he'd actually be likable, because he's a kid at that point. He's still a kid. He's got a $1 million smile. But Earl controlled all that. And Merchant was someone who was trying to, he steered Tiger. He said, don't get involved with Greg Norman or Michael Jordan. These are two guys, when you turn pro, that will be bad influences on you. And unfortunately, Earl fired John Merchant right after Tiger turned pro. And when Armen talks about severing and amputating, John Merchant was like done for life. He's never talked to Tiger Woods again from the moment he got fired. And this was a guy who was lawyer, confidant, and advisor.
Plus, he was the first African American to be on the USGA's executive committee. He came in after Shoal Creek. He was the one that Shoal Creek decided, the USGA decided in 1990 after Shoal Creek they needed a black on the USGA's executive committee. And John and Earl meet at an amateur event. And they sit and have a cocktail together. And the next thing you know, John is raising tens of thousands of dollars at the Country Club of Fairfield and Brooklawn, you know, to help finance Tiger's amateur career. And when Nike comes in and gives Tiger $40 million, $1 million of that was supposed to go to minority golf efforts in the country. And Earl wanted to control that $1 million. And John Merchant, after a few cocktails at the end of a long day, says some things that you're basically giving Earl Woods a license to steal this money if you give him $1 million. Well, that was the end of John Merchant. He was fired the next morning at 6:30 in the morning. Earl came up to him and said, you're done. And John, it's just a scene like out of a movie, you know, which is a lot of what this book really is about. There's just like one scene after another. You're like, this is a movie. So when Jeff is saying, some of these people, I mean, Mark O'Meara, Tiger's big brother, best friend, long time after the 2009 crash, does he hear from, he texts Tiger all the time. Tiger doesn't respond. Charles Barkley was one of Tiger's really close friends. He checks in after the 2009 crash. No response. Charles hasn't talked to Tiger since that crash on November 27, 2009.
I'm sorry?
Nota Begay likes to think he's in the inner circle, but Nota Begay's there for a reason. He's kind of, Tiger speaks through Nota when Tiger feels like it's important to get something out. There's really two, what do you think? I mean, we dealt with him. Mark Steinberg, who's known as Dr. No, and then Glenn Greenspan, who's Tiger's chief spokesperson, who was the chief spokesperson for Augusta National. He's not to be to trifle with. I mean, we had extended email conversations with Glenn where he gave us journalism lessons for the better part of 2 years. And it was, we're like, really? Why don't you just say you don't want to talk to us? You don't have to insult us and give us journalism lessons on top of it. So,
Armen, can you talk about Earl's unmarked grave?
yeah. You want to start? Yeah. So the book opens, and I'll shut up and let Jeff. The book opens with literally this guy named Mike Moeller, who is the sexton at the Sunset Cemetery in Manhattan, Kansas, digging Earl Woods' grave. And by the time you get through that opening section, the reveal is that Earl Woods is buried in an unmarked grave in Manhattan, Kansas. Now, the question is, why? And if you know anything about Earl Woods, the last thing he would want to be buried is in an unmarked grave. There would be a band playing 24/7. There'd be a monument with all the Klieg lights you could possibly find with a stone that would be the size of a small building saying, here lies the father of Tiger Woods. Best friend, hero, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you want to play amateur psychologist, you know, you don't have to look very far to understand that the way that Earl treated Tiger's mother, that's Tita's last words in terms of how Earl is perceived. And if you know anything about Tiger, which we do, you know that he would never cross his mother on something like that. So,
guys, we know golf to be an individual sport, but there's an important time when it's not, and that is in the Ryder Cup. And Tiger's had a lot of experiences in the Ryder Cup, good and bad, and maybe back as a Ryder Cup player sometime in the future and as a potential captain. Could you speak to the various experiences he had and the extent to which his personality either contributed or detracted from the Ryder Cup experiences?
Well, Tiger's never been a good team player. I mean, he's been on a number of teams in his life, starting with high school. He was on a high school golf team, and it was him and the team. And then he went to Stanford. He was on a golf team there. And at Stanford, they were the #1 golf team in the country at the time when he got there. It was a team that was loaded with great players. And Tiger never really integrated. He never really became a member of the team. He didn't do things with the team. Even when they tried to involve him, and Nota Begay was on that team. And even Nota couldn't really get him to engage, to be like be one of the guys. He was never like that. And I think one of the reasons for that is if you back up to even before high school, when Earl started traveling with Tiger to compete in tournaments as a boy, he never allowed him to stay with the other parents and boys. There were so many opportunities where instead of letting Tiger be one of the kids that were participating, Earl would stiff arm the tournament organizers who would say, look, we have a house, where there's going to be other guys, or we have the hotel where all the people are staying. Earl would always stay with Tiger somewhere else, always alone, always separated from all the other players and all the other parents. So when Tiger showed up for tournaments, he was always that guy. It was part of the mystique that grew up with him because of the way his dad controlled that whole situation. So it's not really surprising that by the time he got to Stanford, he wasn't a team player. It's like you're the best player in the country on the best golf team, but you're doing your own thing. Tiger's never really been a team guy, and so it's not really surprising that as a pro, he didn't really do that either. What's interesting is now he wants to be part of that. We have a great moment toward the really end of our book where they're taking a team photo, and Tiger's not on the team, but he's standing there, and the photographer's trying to...
It's Hazeltine, it's the picture day, and Davis Love and the whole team is there, and Davis is in the front chair, and there's two people, and this was told to me by a very prominent caddy on the tour, and Tiger's literally in the shot. There's 12 guys in the shot, and Tiger's still in the shot. He's a vice captain of the team, but the photographer is trying to figure out a way to get Tiger out of the shot. He still thinks he's on the team. And so he goes, Tiger, can you just move a little bit to your right? Can you just kind of move to your right? And Tiger moves to your right, but he's still in the shot. And now the whole team members have figured out, they're like second graders, right? They're just like nudging each other going, oh my God, the guy can't even get out of the photo. He thinks he's still on the team. And finally, the photographer had to say, Tiger, you're not on the team. You need to get out of the shot. Now, if you know anything about Tiger Woods circa 2012, and you mentioned some of these Ryder Cup moments. I mean, when he played with Phil, it's famous, Hal Sutton, that was like the worst decision ever made by a Ryder Cup captain in history. And, well, maybe not in history, but it wasn't a good decision. But when they said that, Tiger, you're not on the team, you got to get out of the way, everybody kind of held their breath because they thought, oh my God, he's just going to blow up. And he realized, and he laughed about it. And it was like such a great moment for all these young players that had grown up idolizing Tiger and worshiping and they were the only reason they began to play golf was because of Tiger Woods. And he's all of a sudden he's one of the guys. He was never one of the guys. He had this mystique about him in the locker room. He used to practice at the complete other end of the range. At Torrey Pines, everybody practices on the south end and hits north. Tiger would practice on the north end and hit south. He would be the only one out there. He didn't want to integrate. He didn't want to talk to anybody because he wanted to kick everybody's ass. He cared about one thing. It was the hardware. Winning tournaments. He could care less about how much money he won. Even sometimes, and Jeff will speak to this in greater detail, there's one great scene where he wins at Torrey and he's literally holding the trophy. He hadn't won in a while, and a friend of mine, Rick Schloss, who's the media director, goes, Tiger, let's go and will you mind taking some pictures with the Century Club guys? And he goes, no, fine. He goes, well, I'll hold the trophy. Tiger goes, no, I'll hold the trophy. I just beat 155 guys. I'm going to hold on to the trophy. That's what he was like. And he was literally in a car, in a courtesy car, when Tom Wilson, who's the executive director of the tournament, says to Rick, where's the trophy? And Rick goes, it's in the car with Tiger. And Tom's like, okay. So he's got to go over and literally pull the trophy out of Tiger's hand in the back seat of the car because Tiger didn't want to give it up. That's what was important to Tiger. he didn't care about anything else except beating everybody else.
What's really interesting is he, for so much of his life, he wanted to be left alone. He's an introvert by nature. He's a loner. He's talked a lot about over his life how much he prefers to be by himself. Doesn't really like being with people. And then in the last 3 years, when he's been immobilized and really stuck in his own house and unable to do simple things like tie shoes and get out of bed, it's really interesting that all of a sudden in the last year or so, he has expressed a desire to be around people. I think he really missed even though he was never really part of the camaraderie on the tour, he truly, I think, got to a point in his life where he actually missed the companionship of the people who are on the tour, whether it's the fans behind the ropes or whether it's the fellow players or the journalists who cover the game. Stuff that I think he took for granted for so long was all those people that were there that he never would acknowledge, that he'd never touch, that he'd never say hi to, that he'd never look in the eye. And now you see him doing all those things. I think it's because he actually really wants to do those things. It's amazing how what immobility will do to you. And I think in his case, it's actually made him a better, more likable person because he appreciates it. He said that himself. That's not us saying that. He has said that. He's talked about how he got to the point where he wanted to be around the people that he couldn't be around anymore. And so it's been neat, I think, to see that evolution of his character and the way he's changed in that regard.
We have time for a couple more.
I have time for about one more question.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to put you in my seat.
If you had the opportunity to interview Tiger, you knew that he was going to be honest, what would be the first two questions you would ask him?
That's two different answers. So I'll give you mine. I'd like to know why Earl's buried in an unmarked grave. That would be my first question. The second question would be, I would go back to that Memorial Day weekend and find out, did that change you? You know, what happened to you after that DUI on the side of the road? And, you know, what impact did that have on you? Because I do believe, and I don't know if it's true or not, Sean, I think that's what changed him. I do believe that he did not want to end up like Earl in some ways, and he loves his kids so much that he didn't want to leave them in that way. And if he ever got reflective about that in terms of questions, that's where I would go. And Jeff, I don't even know what you would ask, so
I've thought about it a lot, actually. I think if I ever got to talk to him, I wouldn't ask him any questions. I think he's been asked a lot of questions in his life. Being a journalist, you know, that's what we do, and I'd just like to have a conversation with him, to be honest with you. And I wouldn't mind turning the tables and letting him ask questions of a journalist. I mean, he's always been the one that's been on the receiving end of probing this probative approach that we all have because we want to know things. And I think we've probed a lot ourselves doing this book, and sometimes that's awkward and uncomfortable or whatever, but I've always thought that he would just be someone that would be interesting to have a conversation with. And the sad thing is, when Armen and I made our approach to him through his spokesman, we didn't ask for an interview. We just asked for a conversation. We just wanted to talk. And we really wanted to sit down face to face and just have a conversation. No tape recorders and notepads and all that crap. We just want to talk and have an opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we're trying to do, and to give him an opportunity to ask us questions about how we're doing it, to see if we could find a meeting of the minds. And what's unfortunate is that we never even got to do that. And that was, I believe, a decision that was made by Glenn Greenspan and maybe Mark Steinberg. I mean, I get it to a certain degree because Tiger's had enough experiences with journalists. He probably didn't want to sit with two guys that are writing about his life. But I think it would have been nice, and it's unfortunate that it didn't happen, that we couldn't have at least had an adult conversation about what we were trying to do and have a chance to not only say to him, but show him, because you can read a lot by looking someone in the eye. And the demeanor that you get, the body language, the vibe, and I think he would have known that we were truthful and that we weren't out to get him. We didn't have an axe to grind. We weren't trying to take him down a peg. If anything, you know, we were trying to show that we believe he's one of the greatest athletes of the century, and we were trying to write a book that reflected that and also explained that, but we didn't get to do that. But, you know, it's still been great, so.
Well, thank you so much for tonight. We appreciate it.
You want us to try it?
So if you would like your book signed,